name is Katie Kovalcin. I'm a designer at Sparkbox, which is a web design agency out of Dayton, even though I live here. And yes, I am from Columbus. Before that, I was in Austin, Texas for a couple of years, working at an agency called Happy Cog. And before that, I lived in Cincinnati, Ohio, which some of you might be familiar with Cincinnati. It's home to Skyline Chili Three Ways. Love them. 3 of the members of 98 Degrees. Cincinnati Reds. Love baseball. And this mall, which is the Cincinnati Mall. Has anyone ever been here? Yeah. It's this really cool, like, futuristic mall that's like really big and fancy and cool. And a lot of money went into building this mall. But the weird thing about this mall is that it's like completely empty, even though you can still go in. It looks exactly like this, where it's immaculate. Tons of money went into the renovations and stuff when it got bought and sold. And for one reason or another, it just like couldn't retain stores, which ultimately means that it can't retain customers. So it looks really cool. It looks like a really good time in that mall. But as a mall, as somewhere that I want to go shop, and for the purpose of it being a mall, it's pretty crappy. These are some pictures that I took going in there. This is the department stores now. Not a very good mall experience. And this is really hard to see, but it's one lone cookie cake that just says thank you. That's like in the abandoned cookie thing. I don't know how long it's been there, but like that very well could still be there. So this is all setting up what happens when things are really beautiful and look really nice. Before their intended purpose, they just don't perform very well. And we can think of our websites sort of in the same way, where they could be designed really beautifully, but if they don't perform well and don't load fast, they're kind of useless. So a lot of performance talks and articles and stuff, and I think a common misconception is that performance is just a technical concern. That's just something that developers need to think about, and they have all the tips and tricks up their sleeve to, they can make anything fast. You know what to do. But the bulk of performance really needs to happen before it ever even gets to development. And this is what this presentation is about, everything leading up to development to ensure that development can then have a performant build. So if you're sitting there and you're like, I don't even think about performance, you should start. It's incredibly important. It's something that I hold very near and dear to my heart. And I really love this quote by Laura Hogan from her Designing for Performance book, which you should all read. It's excellent. But performance, the struggle is usually a cultural concern. The culture of where we work not being set up to really enable performance to really shine, because if we have the technology, that's all there. We know how to build things fast, but there's just a lot of hoops to jump through that get in the way of that. So to try to learn about other people's experiences with culture outside of my own, because I've only worked at small boutique agencies and there's so many other experiences out there, so I know what I've run into, but I wanted to hear what other people have run into. So myself and Tim Cadlick have this podcast, Path to Performance, same name as the talk, and actually 2 people back there from Nationwide, we just released an episode with them earlier this week. So if you like what you hear today, I would suggest checking out the podcast. But in addition to that, to try to find out other people's experiences, I sent out a survey when writing this talk to try to just get data on things that people run into and struggle with for performance. So my results, got a lot of people at small agencies like myself, and all the way up through companies that are like larger than 200 people, ranging from client services to product, in-house, and everything in between. So I got a lot of useful information, and I was able to kind of pull out the common themes. So good news is that a majority of people feel empowered to ignite change in their organization, which is awesome. If you feel empowered, that means you can go to meetups, conferences, and all that stuff, and absorb this information and come back and hopefully see that change. So that's good. This statistic is also good a little bit, where a little over half the people said that performance currently is a priority for them. So that's awesome. But I'm more concerned that also almost half of the people that answered say that performance isn't a priority for them, because like I said, and like the Cincinnati Mall, if it doesn't matter how usable or accessible or all of these other efforts that we go and think about when we make our sites, if it's not loading fast and it never actually reaches our users, all of those other efforts can fail entirely. So you're sitting here and changing that shift in the performance culture at your organization, that begins with you in advocating for that. And I think a lot of people take that to mean like, well, I can just like on the slide, oh, well, it's this really bloated design, but I just like, can kind of tinker with things and make it fast when no one's looking. And that's good, but it's not enough, because it needs to project out to everybody on your team so that we're all thinking about it and working together to make that happen. And it's not just enough for you to be sitting there and kind of off the clock or whatever, just working on it. It needs to go all the way through designers and project managers and everyone in between. We all need to be caring about this. So again, good news. People that say that they advocate for performance say that it's working for them, but also unfortunately a lot of people are saying that it doesn't work or that they can't advocate for it. So hopefully through this presentation you can kind of have some resources that can help you advocate for performance. So some common hurdles that I heard in my survey are leadership, just not caring about it and not up to succeed. Designers obviously handing off incredibly heavy designs. I'm guilty of doing this in the past. Other developers just not caring, and then a couple of other different reasons. And I think a really big thing for a lot of people is just it's not prioritized. There's a ton of other things that we need to juggle. It needs to be responsive and, like I said before, accessible, and all of these other things that the client wants, and it needs to be heavily branded and all of these things, and performance just usually falls to the wayside, where at the end of the build, like, okay, well, let's see if we can make it faster. Let's try and optimize that. And again, if we're not prioritizing performance, all of those other things that we were putting effort into could completely fail. Clients are a really big thing. People like to complain about clients a lot. I am not one of those people. I think if your clients are bad and difficult and doing things that you want to talk crap about, that's you not properly educating them, because clients don't make websites every day, and you're right, they don't get it, but it's our jobs to make them get it and properly educate them and show them why we believe this to be incredibly important. They don't see it as a billable priority. Okay, well, let's show them why it is a priority, why we care about it, why it's important to us, and ultimately why that is baked into everything that we do. We look back to the early days of responsive web design and clients being difficult, and like, we don't need responsive. We don't need that responsive thing. We don't have that many mobile users. We looked at our analytics and like, they're just not there. It's fine. We don't need that. And do you not have that many mobile users because there aren't a lot of people out there on phones, or is it because your experience really sucks on phones? And it's probably not going to be because there aren't a lot of people on phones, because there's time and time again all this research to back up the increasing mobile usage. And we can kind of think of the clients today being like, yeah, well, our site's responsive, that caters to mobile. We don't need to really make it faster. There's not a lot of people using mobile devices. That's fine. And it's like, well, are they not accessing your site on their mobile phones because it's an awful data sucking experience, or because they're just not on their phones, which it's not, because they're not on their phones. I really like the statistic that 8% of websites went responsive between 2013 and 2014, not just because I'm a fan of building things responsibly, but because what this says to me is that the things that we advocate for and find important and educate our clients on and as to why they are important, that makes a huge difference. 8% sounds like a little number, but when we think of all the websites that are out there, that's huge. That's so many sites. So, keep fighting the good fight, because when we educate our clients, it really, really works. I also think it's incredibly important that the first conversation that you have with a client involves performance, and we're talking about how we're going to build their sites to be all of these amazing things, and fast being one of them. And I think that this is absolutely like everything to set up this foundation for success, to have that conversation in the proposal, in the creative brief, and all of those requirements and things like that, all of that early documentation that we do before it ever even gets to design, that we talk about performance in there and how that impacts the client and that education layer. And it doesn't need to be this super technical thing of like, we are going to use this technology, because, you know, clients will glaze over their eyes and just like, okay, yeah, whatever, and they won't see the importance. So just using simple words like fast and speedy and stuff when we're talking to them, like, we're going to give you a fast, rich experience and all of that, that starts to get their whatever gears turning, and they start to think like, yeah, I want that. That sounds good. That sounds like a good time, a thing that I want. And the performance only ever aids all of the other efforts, right? Like, they say we want all of these things. Okay, well, yeah, performance pretty much helps all of those things that you want. So just kind of explaining that to them. And that, for whatever reason, doesn't seem to work or get through to them, we can also come armed with some data that they can't really ignore. Webpagetest.org is like the most amazing website for performance. You can go and measure your client site, their competitors. You can see like film strip views where there's little screenshots of every like millisecond what loads, and you can compare that to competitors. You can also make these videos. Laura Hogan is a huge fan of these videos because it builds that empathy where you can actually see, oh, wow, look at how much slower our site is loading compared to our competitors, and what client likes their competitors to do anything better than they do. So you can't really see it because it's like washed out, but imagine that there's 3 sites here. And you can come saying, here is this competitor, and you can do this whole performance audit, just simply seeing how heavy they are and how long they take to load, and compare them and see where the client ranks alongside their competitors. And that'll usually say like, oh, okay, yeah, well, we want to be faster than them, especially as we keep bogging things down with all of this data. If yours is loading faster, it's going to go a long way. There's Etsy has a statistic. I think they like added just float to one of their pages just to test it. They weren't even real images. They were like invisible images just to see. And they saw, I can't remember the numbers, I have to look it up, but they saw like a 12% bounce rate by adding kind of this false weight, and it wasn't even that much. So all of that business data and money and stuff, clients respond really well to. And you can say like, yes, that is very expensive to you. You are losing money by being slower than your competitors. And not only that, it's costing your users a lot. This is a site that, whatdoesmysitecost.com is great. You can put any URL in, and it'll show you how much that actually costs users to go see your site. And you can even see how much that costs them in their specific countries, like income scale, whatever. And it's really great. So here's some of those more data of the things that like we see when Amazon, you know, when they shave off a couple milliseconds here and there, and how much that impacts their business, which when it's that big of a company, that's huge. That's so much money. And another thing that I keep hearing like through doing the podcast is finding specifically like the key stakeholders of your clients, what they're about, what metrics are important to a marketing person. It might be how many views. And so really getting to know the client and the things that they care about, performance will pretty much play into any of those roles. And you can find those specific metrics to kind of bring up to them to try to sell it to them. Leadership is another big one. When your leaders don't care about this, the people in charge of your organization, it can sometimes set a lot of arbitrary politics that you need to deal with to try to move things along. So that is a big problem for a lot of people. Just, you know, all the different things and sign off, and that cultural shift can be really hard at really corporate or political places like that. And again, that's why I wanted to understand experiences outside of my own and those things that people at those more political organizations, how do you move through all of those hoops? And again, that goes back to finding the things that those key people care about. The good news is a lot of people say it's easy to talk to their leaders and go to a director or a VP or someone and say, hey, I went to this conference or something and they were talking a lot about performance, and I really think that this is something that we need to be thinking about. And that starting that conversation will go a long way, especially if you have things to back it up. And I think it's also important to, kind of lead that initiative and say, hey, I've been playing around with these things and I have found this tool to be really cool and do this thing. Do it at a lunch and learn, and just try to extend that excitement that you have about performance to the people on your team, on your immediate project team, to your managers, and try to get the people around you to care, and then it'll kind of have a domino effect. The other thing is that the time and money and resources spent going into a process that is more performant, it's a reusable process. It isn't, this one very specific thing for this one very specific client. It's something that hopefully will be carried through all of your projects from then on. And even, say, hey, on my next internal project or something maybe that doesn't have as much pressure on it, let me try seeing what happens when we think about performance from the beginning and really have a focus on that. And let's see what happens. And hopefully it'll be wildly successful and everyone will be like, yeah, cool, let's do that. Another thing that a lot of people really struggle with is that they just aren't resourced to have that time to think about performance. And project managers play a large part in this. And I think it's incredibly important for your project manager to understand that this is something that is important and we care about. I actually have an episode on the podcast coming up with the project manager that I used to work with that oversaw the performance budget, and hopefully that will help allow PMs to understand why this is important. So and that doesn't need to be a technical conversation. I don't know if I've said this yet, but I'm not a technical person. I don't typically write code. I am a designer, and I get kind of shamed that I still use Photoshop, but I still use Photoshop. But the project managers are the ones that are having most of the conversations with the clients. So they need to understand why we are building something to be fast, so that when the client comes with these outlandish requests, they can be the ones to educate them and be the first one to kind of diffuse that fire. And I'm going to get to performance budgets here in a little bit, but the project managers oversee that and make sure that we're keeping on track with staying within our performance budget. So it's hugely important for you to talk to your PMs and tell them why it's something you want to care about. And designers are usually the biggest culprit of derailing performance efforts, and I definitely have been there. This is a really common sentiment that a lot of people have, where all these decisions happened before it ever even got to me, the developer, and the designer handed me this incredibly bloated PSD file that has all of the carousels and all of the fonts and all of the things that will weigh this down, and there's just no way to make it performant. But designers really need to embrace performance because it, again, just aids all of those efforts that we have as designers. All of the UX thinking that goes into our wireframes and stuff, even down to our font choices and stuff. Performance will just help deliver that best design to our users. I really like this quote from Ethan Marcotte, which is the foreword for the Responsible Responsive Design book by Scott Gell, also a fantastic book that I recommend reading. But I like this because, we're people that make things for the web. We always think of it as being this like indestructible force, like the web is here to stay. It's really important. It's important to all of us. It's actually way more fragile than we really sit and think about. There's so much that can happen to connectivity that it could be dropped. Wi-Fi is so spotty. All of these things can happen that prevent our sites from ever reaching our users. So this is a screenshot that I took in the best case scenario on my iPhone 6 in my high-speed internet apartment, and I don't know what that design looks like. I mean, it's Facebook, so Facebook is something that's super embedded in people's lives, so they'll probably stick around and wait for this to load. But sites that most of us are building aren't super embedded in people's lives that they're gonna, wait around. Anything could have happened between this and the time that this was loading. I could click off, my internet could drop, there's all these things. And again, this is me on the best case scenario. Most users in the world are not on iPhone 6s and they are not on high-speed internet. This is a site that I found on like a design inspiration site. Beautiful design, right? It's got parallax, it's got videos, it's got these rich images, it's got all the things. And it's really well designed. Like, I think it's beautiful. But it's so heavy. It is almost 5 megabytes, which when I go to what does my site cost, sorry, this is a little hard to see, but in certain countries, this costs almost 20% of their daily income to go to that super cool designer site. And that just feels really selfish to me, that we're like, yeah, I have a cool trendy design and it looks really great and I put all this effort in, and you want someone to pay like a fifth of what they made that day just to look at that? That's kind of ridiculous to me, and it's just sobering for designers to realize that those decisions we make have consequences ultimately to the users. And you can't really talk about good user experience without factoring performance in. Again, sorry, my pink is hard to see, but basically if you imagine that this is reversed. If we kind of look at a typical project timeline, like design is here, and then as development ramps up, design kind of tapers off. And so I like to work with having developers in this design phase pop in and out and look and weigh in on my designs so that we can make sure that we are keeping on track with performance. So this is all design. And what I like them to look for is if there's any red flags. If I've designed a pattern and we talk through it and that's going to be really heavy, we can sit there and sketch out together and figure out ways to make that better. And a lot of times developers have really great design ideas. And I really like when they offer solutions to that. In the instance of maybe like the client absolutely has to have a carousel, well, maybe we can talk about lazy loading the images or something like that, or sketch out a different solution entirely. So I really like to think of developers as my performance spirit guides. Like, they help guide me in the right direction of making sure that my designs are fast, so that before the client ever sees it and falls in love with it, we are making sure that we're not showing them anything that's going to be super slow. You can't really see this, but carousel and 2 videos. That's kind of a lot. That's heavy. So when the client asks for all of these things, this is when we can have a discussion about priority, because this really comes down to a content thing. Do you really need all these videos saying all these things on your homepage with the carousel? Like, that's just a lot, and that's just because you can't decide on what content is most important to that page. So this is where we kind of come in and say, well, here's a sketch of this solution that prioritizes this. Here's a sketch of another solution that prioritizes something else. We can have that discussion with the client about what are you really trying to do here, because it doesn't need to be all of these things. And I think that's a really important part about dealing with this with clients, is having suggestions for them, not just saying like, no, we don't want to do it. Which also goes for developers. When you're in these design reviews, a really great way to make designers hate performance is to totally shut down every idea that they have and just like, no, I don't want to build that. That's hard. And there's times where you need to say no, of course, but it's much more constructive to say, yeah, I get where you're going with that, but maybe if we did something else similar, I get what you're trying to do, but that will totally lower performance budget. Maybe we can talk about other ideas. So I think it's really important to have a dialogue about it and not just be the no person. Laura talks about how she likes to reward people, and she has at Etsy they have performance heroes, where every quarter someone, not even developers, designers, PMs, whoever, if they did a really good job that quarter of shepherding good performance, they'll award them as the performance hero. So it's about rewarding the good behavior rather than kind of being the performance cop and just being like no to everything. So try to have like good discussions as much as you can. It's also really important to have your designs in code as early as you can, because then we can run tests and actually have the numbers to say whether that was a really fast solution or a really slow solution, and where can we make that faster and optimize it. And then if there is a problem, we can pair up and figure out that solution. So the code is really great. There's a couple, I think, front tasks and other things out there that you can have run through that code, and then it'll tell you how much that weighs and how long it took to load and things like that. So it's this balancing act where, you know, of course, sometimes there's these really rich marketing and brand guidelines that we have to stick to, and sometimes there's things that we just we want to make fast. So it's that give and take, and it's compromise, and it's really having the designer and developer work really well together to kind of talk about that and figure out where that line is. So I'm up here talking about things that are really nice in theory, yeah, that sounds cool. But one of the responses that I thought was really interesting is yeah, it's great to rally everyone behind something, but actually getting that moving through the company is an entirely different story. So that's where I think performance budgets come in. I think that they are super valuable to explain to clients, to explain to designers, to explain to everybody on your team, and have performance be baked into the project. As Tim Cadlick said, he has a ton of articles about performance budgets on his site that you should go check out. But it's basically kind of like this conversation piece where it's just that focal point, as he said. I think I'm botching that quote. But it's super important for us to establish the performance budgets before design. We want our designs to be happening within this performance budget, so that can help guide those decisions. Like the example of carousels and all these videos and stuff. If we had a performance budget before design, that wouldn't have happened because we would have known before it ever even was in Photoshop that that was going to be a really heavy solution. So I think it's incredibly important to establish this performance budget before we ever get to design. And then throughout design, development, integration, launch, and then after we're not even around anymore and the client's maintaining it, this is hopefully something that will be a part of their process as well, that moving forward, they stay within that performance budget. And Sonia Perez-Cruz has a really amazing talk on designing within a performance budget. You can find that on Vimeo from Smashing last year. But in that, and I worked on projects that she mentions in that video with her. We used to work really closely together. And in that, she talks about this one project that we worked on last year for a major pizza chain retailer. And that was a project where we went into kickoff, yes, we are going to use a performance budget. We had this whole deck about why performance was important. We were really trying to sell it. And we were saying fast as a feature and all this stuff. You will be the fastest one. This supports all of your claims. And they were just yeah, well, that's not marketable. And we were pretty defeated and well, we'll still try to make it fast, but whatever. And then a couple weeks later, one of their major competitors came out with a new marketing campaign that had Blake Shelton from I think he's a country singer or something. I don't know. He was in the commercial and he has a site pulled up on his phone and he's it's fast like a cheetah. And we were oh, what? And so then our client was okay, yeah, we want that. So that's just an interesting anecdote that I think to, get performance sold in is yeah, when your competitors have it, they definitely want it. So then the performance budget was a really crucial part to the design and development of that particular project. Anyways, what I was getting at, watch that video because she has really great stuff. So I kind of haven't really explained what exactly a performance budget is yet, but it basically works like any other budget, like any other monetary budget, where you have a set number and you try to stick within that number. So when we're talking about performance, there's kind of three important metrics, and I should actually kind of asterisk this, that there's also perceived performance, which is how fast the user, it appears to be loading, even if it's not necessarily fully loaded. It's, if we have the text show up first, at least they can start reading before the images, are loaded and things like that. But these are kind of the important, actual concrete number metrics. When talking about performance, we have the page weight and then the start render and fully loaded times, which are a little bit more abstract to think about and how things are loading, and that can differ a lot depending on the connection that you're on. So when talking about a performance budget with clients and with designers and stuff, I think that the page weight is kind of the most tangible number for everybody to sort of understand, even us non-technical people. So having this concrete number that we can just really easily add or subtract from is kind of the easiest place to start, at least. So like I said, works like a monetary budget. So let's say that my monetary budget that I just have in my life is that I have a $500 a month budget, and I'm going to spend $100 on groceries, and $100 on clothes, and $300 on my rent. These are not realistic numbers, but let's say that I need to save up for something. So I cut my budget back to be $400. Well, my rent's pretty set in stone. I can't really pull from that. So maybe I'll pull $50 from my groceries and my clothes, and then all of that adds up to $400. And this could be a performance budget. If we have a 400 kilobyte performance budget and we spend 50 on fonts, 50 on our CSS, and 300 on our images, that all adds up to 400. So you can see how it's like pretty easy to add and subtract from here. And the other cool thing is that we can shift that around as we need to. So maybe I need to add a little bit of JavaScript, and I decided that I wanted to add more fonts. We can move those numbers around so that they all equal 400 still. Does that make sense? Like, you know, shifting it around. It's just like any other budget. You can't spend what you don't have. If we don't have any more money to spend, it can't just magically appear. And we can think of our performance budgets in the same way. Like, we can't just make space on our page appear. So using it with clients, and they seem to understand it pretty well so far that I've done, is work with their team to really explain the importance and explain how we're using it, and that education layer is super important here. So projects that I've worked on, we like to have like a project hub where that's like our main source of deliverables to show to the client. And in that, and that could be even something like Basecamp for you, have a page that is like the performance page that explains everything. So a page that has worked really well, like on that pizza site, for example, we explained what a performance budget is and, you know, linked articles about it, what this particular project's budget is, and cite the, you know, goals and requirements and stuff and everything that led to that number. And if you have questions about, you know, where to start on figuring out that number at the end, talk to me, because that's like a whole other conversation. But why we're doing this, why performance is important, how to add new features, which is really important. You can either optimize something that's already on the page, you can remove something that's already on the page, or you can just not add that new feature. And also, like I was saying before about grunt tasks, sort of weighing everything as you go. With every deliverable that we did there, we said this is this template's weight, whether it was over or under budget, and, you know, some ideas that we had for making that on budget if it was over. And an image optimization guide, which is, I think, so important to educate clients on how to properly optimize the images, because usually they're going to be the ones maintaining that CMS after, and they're going to be the ones just willy-nilly adding images wherever they see fit, and that's going to be really hard to maintain. So I know Filament Group just really tries to automate and bake everything into the build process as much as they can, so the clients can't just start going crazy with things. So I think that having a page that just really, anyone on their team can come see it, anyone who joins this project team can come and be like, okay, cool, this is something that is important to this project. So having that documented somewhere is really important. But of course, client projects mean that there will be curveballs. There will be some very important stakeholder at the end that will come in and swoop and poop on everything, you know, as they see it. And what are we to do? They want to add all of the things to our design that we have made to be performant. So we have those three options where, you know, say they come in and they want all of the carousels. I always use that example. You know, for that pizza site, they wanted to add a carousel and a carousel. They wanted like a carousel up here and then another carousel. Okay, so you want that new carousel, that second carousel. That means that we can make something else on the page faster. So maybe that means removing some images somewhere. Maybe that means reducing all the little like social tags and stuff. Whatever it may be, we can make the page faster to accommodate and make space for that. Or we can remove things from the page entirely, you know, back to that exercise in priority. What's actually important? Is this new feature more important than something else on the page? Okay. Or, hey, we can just like not add it because we don't need it and this is the first time we're hearing about it. So this is, again, where the performance budget serves as a conversation piece with the client, where we can have that dialogue about, why are you adding this? Is it really important? And again, kind of like gently nudge them, like, hey, remember back at kickoff when you were really excited by having a super fast experience? This doesn't align with that. So that's, again, where that budget can just kind of help keep things on track. So let's say that the client wanted to come in and add another image. Well, that has to come from somewhere. So maybe that means removing the fonts and relying on system fonts in the design, which sometimes you have to do. Because, again, budgets, you can't spend what you don't have. So using with designers, I remember when my team first wanted to use a performance budget sometime last year, and I was just like, hey, like, that sounds not fun. That sounds like it'll suck the life out of all of my cool designs that I have yet to create. But I really started to embrace it, and it doesn't hinder design in any way. And I really like this quote by Dan Mall, where he says, designers tend to do their best work within constraints. You know, like we make things responsive, we make sure they look great on all devices, we make sure that the colors are accessible, we spend all this time looking at typography and stuff. It's just another constraint that we have to think about, and that's fine. That's just another layer to make sure that we are, in fact, designing something that is usable and great. So again, like I said, I like to really work closely with the developers to help come up with this number. It's not just it rests on my shoulders as the designer because I'm the first one to touch it. No, as a team, we're working to figure out where that number's coming from. So, you know, we look at everything that we know about the competitors and things like that. And I know that it's been tested and researched and all that, that it takes about 20% faster than wherever you're at for it to be a noticeable difference to users. So that's a pretty like baseline place to start, just 20% faster than competitors or where they're already at. It's kind of figuring out where the clients are at and what's reasonable. You know, you can't go from 0 to 100, or, well, I guess it would be the reverse, but you can't just instantly have an insanely fast site tomorrow. So, you know, you want to take baby steps and come up with a reasonable budget. And it's a lot of having conversations about what we know about the client. So if we know, and a lot of times this happens where the client's like, we're working on all these promo videos. We're so excited to get them on the website. Okay, well, they're really excited. They put a lot of money into it. They're making these videos. Like, we have to include them. I know we don't want to, but we have to. So then maybe the developer can say, okay, well, you know, I know how much videos tend to weigh. There's, you know, we can just have a load on pages load. But then maybe they can make suggestions for the other parts of the design. Like, well, maybe we'll scale back the font size if they have these videos. Things like that, where we take what we know the client has and wants to incorporate, and then try to have a discussion about, okay, well, how can we work around that? Or I, as a designer, know they have all these new brand fonts. They want all the fonts. How can we reel that in? I'm always amazed how many times when you look at a font kit, when they just have checked all the boxes and are just loading all 14 weights of it, and we're using like 5 or something. We don't want that. That's just added bloat. We don't need to think about that. So I like to look to the developers like, okay, what should my font kit look like? How many weights of each font can we load and get away with? And that's great to know before design starts, so that I'm not coming with a design with all of the weights and then have to try to consolidate. And this also will help streamline the CSS. It'll be great. Or we can just kind of have like a more holistic conversation about it. Like, I know that there are these goals that we need to achieve. There's these brand guidelines we have to work within, and maybe the developer can kind of benchmark where that might be, how much that can weigh, you know, just super high level, but at least it's a place to start. You know, we're not just pulling numbers out of a hat. Everyone always asks like, yeah, but what's like, you know, just a magic number? Just like people are like, yeah, I know there's like no fold, but let's say that we want to put things above the fold if there were a fold, you know, like that. It's not like that. There's no, I don't think that okay, Paul, Irish or Lewis, I can't remember which one. One of them says that there is a magic number, but I think it's more about, again, meeting with clients and what's reasonable to them. And a performance budget is not a trump card for developers to just come in and like slash all the designs and say that's not performant. Again, that will really be frustrating for the rest of the team. It's having that conversation and figuring out what's best and not just, well, we want a fast site, so that means you don't get to design anything. It's more conversational than that. So this is an example of a bad conversation where, you know, I know they have these videos, they're really excited about it, and I was just like, nope, that won't fit in the budget, and we're not going to do it. Like, that's not helping anyone. So fonts are something that I really like. Way into typography. I wrote an article last year where I weighed a lot of popular typefaces on the web to see how much the same font kit of 4 weights compared. It was actually pretty surprising how different ones could be. And I think that if a designer was going to start thinking about performance, that fonts would be a really good place to start because they're loaded on every page. So that has a really big impact on the site as a whole, if we can kind of cut down on how many fonts we're loading. So, for example, Futura. I love Futura. I think it's great, and I like to use it. Brand and Grotesque, while not entirely similar, admittedly, it has a lot of similar qualities, and perhaps that would fit in his design as well. It's almost half, or it's under half of the size of Futura, which is crazy to me, that they can just vary so much. So that's not to say you should always just pick the fastest font possible and not design with anything else, but it's just, again, that balance. Like, is it worth that change aesthetically? Like, maybe Brand and Grotesque fits just as well, and I can use that 135K that I saved elsewhere on the page. Or, you know, ultimately, if Futura works better, obviously go with the gut. And when it gets to brand guidelines, you obviously want to go with the brand one. But I just encourage designers to think about that, just like we look at the X height and you know, all the character subsetting and things like that. Looking at how heavy the font kit is just another facet into choosing a typeface. And we can also set a font performance budget as well. So taking $100 that I had from my overall monthly budget and then breaking it down in my groceries. Let's say that I spend $20 on veggies, $20 on pizzas, $20 on fruits, and $40 on meats. I don't even ever buy meat, so I don't know why I have the example. But for our font kit, we can have 100 kilobytes for our overall font budget, and maybe that breaks down to this similarly for the different weights that we're going to use. But, oh, client curveball, of course, or this one life curveball, I had to spend $60 at the vet because that happens. Well, now I only have $40 to spend on groceries this week. So maybe I'll be healthy, I'll just eat fruits and veggies, and then I'll supplement that with the pantry foods that like I have, but I just avoid eating. Similarly, if you know we're tight on our budget, we can just maybe load 2 weights of the fancy display face and then supplement that with system fonts, which are kind of like free. So how does this help set up a foundation for a more performant build? Well, we've already talked to the client about it, so they get it, they're on board, they like it. The project manager understands and is advocating for that and talking to clients about it. The designer is designing within a performance budget, so they're thinking about it as they make their decisions. And then development is hopefully integrated with performance as a priority, and you are free to make it as fast as you want it to be, or you can. So obviously I'm up here talking a lot about advocating and getting started with it, so resources are an important part of that. We have a Slack group that we started, you know, along with the podcast, where a lot of really great performance discussions happen, and you can go to this URL and you can self-invite yourself and come join. There's pretty much everybody I mentioned in this presentation is in there, which is kind of awesome. So you can talk to some really awesome people with any performance questions you have, and also all of the books that I've kind of mentioned in articles, a page test, performance budget, and my site cost. So I think that this is a really great place to start to check out all this stuff. Thank you. Yeah,
Does anyone have any questions or anything?
Oh, there's 3 of you now. I think you were first. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that's actually what the whole site is. You put in, sorry, that screenshot was really hard to see. You can put in any URL, and it'll tell you your site weighs this much, which that's pulling from web page test. And it's actually, they're both like integrated with each other. So if you go to web page test, there's like a little sidebar that has like $ signs, and you can click that and it'll tell you the monetary value. Or on what does my site cost, it'll pull in the web page test, like it weighs 5 megabytes, and then all the data below it has these tabs that you can switch between the dollar amount, like the income percentage and stuff like that. That's like what the entire site is just kind of tabbing through how much it weighs. Like web page test gives a really in-depth look at where the weight is coming from, and then what does my site cost gives like an in-depth look at the monetary value for users. It's like, yeah, it's like for your data plan, like, you know, it costs so much dollars to visit that site because that used up so much of your data, like if that makes sense. So that's like, yeah, how much users are paying to visit your site on their phones. And then you're next.
Yeah, so do you see performance sort of on a maturity model similar to like maybe responsive design, where 2 or 3 or 4 years ago you had to sell it hard, talk about all the other things that you sort of talked about. You got to start early in the proposal. We're going to do responsive design. Here's why we're going to do it. Here's why it's important. And now I feel like largely it's not a discussion anymore, right? You're going to get a responsive side. I can't hear you 100% of the time, but it's not as much of a conversation. Do you think performance is going to do that as well, or do you think that that's going to be something that's always going to be important that you need to talk about constantly, even 5 years from now?
I think once there's more awareness around it, that conversation won't need to be as difficult. Like I know Film Group says like pretty much all of their clients know that they are like a performance focused shop, so they'll come in just saying like, yes, we want a faster shop, so you're going to do that. I think, which is interesting, I was just at Velocity conference like a couple weeks ago, which is an entire conference about performance, which like I still feel like I'm pretty new to the whole performance thing, and I was like, oh wait, there's a whole conference about it, but that's like all the back-end DevOps stuff, and you know, they've been thinking about performance forever. Like Steve Souders wrote his book like, I don't know, like 15, 20 years ago or something. So performance has always been a big part, but I think with the rise of responsive web design in the past couple of years, that's started to bloat the front end part and that component and design and everything. So I feel like now we're kind of just like trying to undo everything that we added with responsive web design, laying down the pages. So I mean, I think it will always be an important part. I don't know how if that conversation will shift in the coming years, but I think I've definitely seen like an explosion this year in like increased awareness about it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that it's specifically looking at mobile devices on that site. I don't think it's desktop. Yeah. I don't know the like technical part of it about how it's pulling in that data and stuff. It might be on that site. But you can join that Slack and ask Tim yourself how he did it. There's another.
The way they do We all care about performance, but the developers work backwards for me and I work forward for them. And I'm just not sure how to move ahead getting that end view. So you're going to see good websites for it, but the way that they want to do it internally, they won't use these types of reviews. So I'm not sure how to present that or if you have any suggestions of what you did early stages of trying to boost performance on websites, for yourself as a team. It's kind of how I feel right now. I'm kind of stuck where the developers want this, but they don't know where to go. And I can make my design as performance capable as possible. And get nowhere. So like this first thread pops out, this first line of chat brings me to the top.
I'm not sure.
So like bring yourself back to 2012 when you care about performance and you first try to give to somebody and say this is why it matters. Go out these websites as they use. I just pretty much have nowhere to go trying to boost performance.
You're a designer?
Yeah.
The developers do or don't care about
They do, but we're in a team that we can't change because it's company-wide. So we can change it if there's enough factor figures that they aren't in performance yet. They're still just trying to make sure my design works.
Yeah. If you work for the one I think you work for, were they not just on the podcast talking about they started doing performance? Might be a question for them.
There's a lot of segments. It's just it's interesting. I would like to probably be working with these people over 411. But it's just difficult. So I've had a hard time having these conversations. It just feels like, let's make it look like that. So just having those conversations without having.
Are you involved in like the development process at all?
So we use a CMS tool that is provided to us that we can really check.
Yeah. That's tough.
We can skip that.
We can talk after.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel on the spot. I don't know. Like I've never worked in an organization like that, so that's where I'm like still trying to kind of understand other people's like specific obstacles and stuff as well. But we can chat after.
So you touch a lot on like if you decide to allocate an image, like whatever you want to take down, what do you think about using responsibilities? Like, I know there's like CSS queries for bandwidth and network connectivity. They're like really, really unsupported right now, or like image sets, or like serving up lower quality like JPEG versions of some PNG on certain devices. Like that. I read an article saying like yes and no.
I think there's they've recently changed the name of the responsive issues community group, the ones that are really pushing for like the picture element and like all of that. I don't follow the tech side of it like that closely, but I think that there's definitely a future in another thing that I've been working towards getting better at is doing little things in the images that I'm designing to make them faster. Like you can do things like blur unimportant parts of the images, and then that compresses it, and then also using like the correct file format. So there's like tricks that designers can do within the images to make them faster, and there's I'll have to look at the exact article, but there's I think it's actually on that responsive issues community group site where they show exactly how to do those things. But I think that there's definitely like a future in the serving the different images to the different devices.
How do you see like a mobile first design philosophy playing with performance budget? Is that practical to like bring that?
By design, do you mean design or like designing as you build it out?
I don't mean from the technical perspective. I mean from like the content strategy.
Mm-hmm.
To be thinking about the mobile user before you're thinking about the designs that have more real estate.
yeah, I think that that's important. And sorry, I keep like referencing the same people, but they just have such good stuff that they share. Filament Group, they have one of them, Jeff Lembeck. He has what he lovingly calls a jank tank. That's just a bin that's filled with a bunch of really crappy old devices. And that's actually where he starts testing and building first, is these like undesirable but like widely used devices. So I do think that starting with kind of the lowest common denominator of like basically like not starting with an iPhone 6, but like thinking about things in that way is important for like, if we can make it fast on that, like the rest of it's gravy. So I do think that that is an important part to that answer.
Yeah, I was curious as like whether people who are really passionate about performance, if a mobile first design philosophy is espoused, or if it's really impractical because of kind of the limitations that it sets on what you can try to achieve.
Yeah. So I'll admit I don't design mobile first. I kind of don't necessarily think that's like helpful in my personal like process, because I have the luxury of working really closely with developers that we can kind of like in the browser figure out all of those things together. So I honestly think it's just kind of like what works best for you in thinking about performance. And if that is mobile first and that helps you prioritize that, then like cool, that's great. I don't have strong opinions one way or the other about like the mobile first approach. Was there another one up here? I think we had it.
I'm not too familiar with performance budgets, but does it make sense to maybe have multiple performance budgets, like one for mobile, one for desktop, things like that, where desktop you might have a little more room, and mobile you want to make it a little more narrow?
I think like from a philosophical, like accessible web, everyone getting the same content point of view, no. But I do know some people have kind of like different budgets for different scenarios. And also a point that I didn't mention is you want performance budgets to kind of be like not set in stone, but pretty strictly adhered to. But that doesn't mean that they can't shift like the more we learn about a project or something. Like they are, there is a little bit of wiggle room to kind of change it as things pop up. Even though like you don't want to set that precedent, and then of course it'll always get pushed back. But if you learn something that just makes that budget not make any sense, you can sort of shift it. But I don't necessarily think that like I would want to have a separate one for mobile and desktop, because ideally we kind of want to be serving like the same sort of content to all devices.
What's a cool design trick that you've seen recently that simulates better performance without actually being fast?
Like adding in like little. Okay. Actually, the Nationwide podcast episode, they talked a lot about like if something is going to take a while to load, like adding in little animations and things like that to let the user know like there's something happening. It's not just taking a long time to load, and maybe those animations change as things load. Like I know that there's a lot of animations out there that are kind of like falsely loading things, like step 1, we're working on it, step 2, or like a meter that doesn't actually mean anything. So there are things like that if something's going to take a while. But I think for like design tricks and the perceived performance, the biggest thing is getting the content that the user needs as fast as possible, and that usually means the text or the content. And there's a lot of articles about the like flash of unstyled text and things like that, where like that's okay, and designers I think needs to kind of be okay with that. That we're going to load the text, it's going to get there really fast, and that might not mean the font is there yet, but like at least the information that they need. And most users, I think like there's data to back this up, don't really care if it's not the right font yet. So that's like something that like pained me to hear, and I've just had to embrace it. But that's like a big one, is getting the text there as fast as we can, even regretfully as a designer if it's unstyled.
I think you start getting text, sort of learned my lesson in certain, like, and I think typically publishing sites where I feel like they are trying that, right? So they put all the ads and the navigation take a while, they defer those. So I've already started reading the first paragraph, and I might put my finger about it, like it always seems to be right when I put my finger down that everything else loads in, and now I'm clicking on an ad or something like that because and I think that it's, I don't know. I mean, so I've learned, like, I just can't, I don't care how fast your text loads because I've learned my lesson. If you're going to load 5 ads,
the ads are.
I think that Columbus Underground or something like that here. I mean, they've got so much on top that I've just learned. I'm just going to wait for you guys to load all of your stuff.
Yeah.
So I think that's where it might be faster from a performance standpoint. But I think user experience really hurts because now I just get frustrated that I might be clicking on an ad or lose my place in the paragraph because you prefer your ad.
Yeah, I think publishing is like its own beast with all of the advertising. Like that's just like so much performance hits and stuff. And like I think that that's exactly why Facebook came out the instant articles thing, is to be like, oh, here's a solution. Just kind of like, you don't have to deal with figuring it out with your ads. Just bring it onto ours, and we'll load it fast, and that doesn't matter. So yeah, publishing is like tough, and I have opinions about the Facebook thing if you want to talk after too. But
So I think we have time for only one more question. There is one more. Man, I killed that.
Yeah.
That's like you guys. That's the question. Are we? Yeah. Oh, there you go.
So when you're designing, you think about like how it's possible to oh, I can get drop that on.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm going to design it on
Yeah. I think about it, like I might not know how to write the CSS, but like I know what can be achievable in CSS, and like especially when it comes to animations and stuff, like, okay, what can we do? Like tiny little CSS animations versus like crazy big heavy ones, and different solutions. And that's come with having the conversations with developers that have suggested like, oh, hey, we could do a CSS and that would be way faster. So I've just kind of like started to catalog like those things, and then I tend to design knowing the achievable CSS ways, because that will usually be faster than a lot of other solutions. So yes, in short, yes. I think CodePen is honestly like one of my favorite design resources. I might be biased, but I think that it has a lot of like really great UI and like actual interactions with stuff that like, that's kind of a place where I go to look for those things. And it's a good conversation tool between designers and developers to be like, oh yeah, like this thing, I can't quite think of it. I'll search on CodePen and be like, yes, this is responding how I want it to do, or like all those things. So I think like just browsing CodePen is like a good place to start.